My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. Thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. We are going to get started early because, oh, do we have so much to talk about. It has mostly to do with the LA protests and the ICE riots against ICE detention there. We're going to get into all the details. I have tweets from all weekend, journalists on the ground, the whole thing. We're going to get into it. There's even a story that ties this all to the economy, ironically enough, and the breaking headline that President Trump is mobilizing 700 Marines from 29 Palms, California, to help quell the protests and settle things down. So we have live updates from the New York Times. We're getting into those. We're getting into everything that's happening. This really isn't hit mainstream media, which is surprising. But it's been all over social media. So we're here to cover it. We also have I also have an interesting profile on Curtis Yarvin in the New Yorker, if you haven't heard of him, and a handful of other stories along the way. So, housekeeping, if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, please go to CameronJournal.com/newsletter and sign up for the newsletter. You get the Saturday wrap-up, an occasional Sunday dispatch, which is kind of more fun and personal, I could call them, and then different content throughout the week. I don't do a ton, maybe 2 or 3 a week sort of thing, but it's part of my whole new brand shift away from doing articles like for Google and for search and more to doing a newsletter, developing more of an audience and relationship with you all. So make sure to do that. If you're looking for a different platform to watch the NewsHour on, other than wherever you're watching it right now, head over to CameronJournal.com/newshour, and you'll be able to find the best platform for you, because I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Twitch, I'm on YouTube, so wherever you are, we will be there also. So, we're very excited about all of that. And we're also doing good stuff. This week's newsletter we talked about the Elon Musk breakup, and all sorts of great stuff. And then we have a ton of new people as well. So in the newsletter. So thank you all for signing up for that. Also, if you're looking for if you're looking to support the Cameron Journal, support me and the journalism I do, and producing this stuff for you every week, make sure to sign up for Cameron Journal Plus. It's only $5 a month. So, just head over to CameronJournal.com/subscribe, or if you sign up for the newsletter, you can sign into your WordPress account and upgrade. You can upgrade to paid. So, that's a lot of fun, and that's most of the housekeeping stuff that we have going. I am excited this week because my next book, America's Lost Generation, went into production this week. It's in layout, which is really exciting. That book, I had opened pre-orders for it last year, and we got delayed on the publisher side. So we're finally moving it forward, which is very exciting. And that's, a very exciting thing. I was actually doing an interview today with a nice man in Denver named Dale Hutchinson, who and we ended up talking about it quite extensively, which got into Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and healthcare and different policies and all this sort of thing. And it was a quite expansive conversation. So I don't know when that will be out yet, but it'll be out at some point. And I'll probably go back to talk to him about that. I'm going to do a bunch of shows in preparation of this book and everything. So it's really exciting. I had a lot of back and forth with editorial about all the last minute final changes, and we put together a bibliography and figuring out table of contents and all that something. But America's Lost Generation is coming. I'm really excited to finally put it out there. It only has taken me 5 years to get this book out. So I do many things quickly in life, but getting books out into the market is not one of them. I need to work on that. We'll get a little bit more efficient, but it's a good thing. So without further ado, let's dive right into the news. And we're going to start obviously with immigration. So there we go. So let me start. So this is the New York Times latest updates. Um, and we're gonna kind of not go there yet. We're gonna start back at the beginning of the story. Um, and we're gonna kind of get into kind of how this started. So over the weekend, this is from the 6th. This is from, I think, Friday. Yeah, because the yesterday was the 8th, 7th, Friday. Yeah, this is from Friday. This is from a great journalist named Brian Allen. He's been eyes on the ground, which is really great. And this is, there were people protesting at the ICE Center, and LAPD shows up in full riot gear, as you can see here and here, which is quite frightening. And it says this just escalated fast, which I thought was, initially I think we all thought LAPD would tamp this whole situation down and it would be over, pretty soon, pretty quickly. Then this was the protest, I think, before the cops showed up. They were pretty expansive. People had signs out. They were lining the sidewalks around the ICE detention center, which is the building there in the background. That's actually, and so people were going around and kind of surrounding the building, basically stopping anyone from going in or coming out. So everyone connected with ICE was basically trapped in the building. And so, in fact, it says, downtown LA just turned into a scene out of a movie. An LA business owner locked ICE agents inside their building during a search. Now the FBI is on site. They're surrounding federal agents across Los Angeles. ICE had been conducting mass arrests of undocumented immigrants, and people were not having any of it. And tensions are rising fast as a standoff. And that's very much what it has turned into. Protesters clashing with law enforcement, destroying stuff outside, not letting anyone or anything out. And there's the people inside the ICE building kind of looking out at it all. This guy has got his weapon up and out, ready for trouble. And so, yeah, I've been really relying on him over this weekend to keep us appraised of the situation. And then I just kind of started to, for the purposes of this, wanted to kind of go over just kind of where we are. So I was, just kind of looking at, looking at everything, and, the protests are still ongoing. There's National Guard on the ground. This is from 2 hours ago. It's still sunny, obviously, because it's not that late in California. So yeah, we still have this, this happening. There's a CNN report of 500 Marines being mobilized in response to the Los Angeles protests. Mexico's president has called out against the tax on remittances. We're going to come back to that. Remember that, because we're going to come back to that. This is the video of Trump wanting if he's going to arrest Gavin Newsom.
Come and arrest him. Should he do it? I would do it if I were Tom. I think it's great. Gavin likes the publicity, but I think it would be a great thing. He's done a terrible job. Look, I like Gavin Newsom. He's a nice guy, but he's grossly incompetent. Everybody knows. All you have to do is look at the little railroad he's building. It's about 100 times over budget. We're putting a flagpole over there. Under budget. I always do under budget. What is your Gavin?
And then we also have protesters outside the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. There's also been a protest in North Carolina. It's kind of spreading nationwide, honestly. Like, it's starting to really go crazy. But it's been an interesting feed. California is currently suing for the mobilization of the National Guard. This is the Asheville, North Carolina. Greenlit a full-blown anti-ICE protest tonight. A direct response to LA riots. What started as a spark in California spreading east. This is a coordination. The system thought it could ignore the fire. Instead, it was watching it jump state lines. And LAPD is abusing protesters on horses in the street. There's a small explosion. This is what's going on kind of currently. And the commentary has been interesting. This one stood out to me. This kind of thread. Right, so what you need to know about the uprisings in LA is that when you walk into a department store, a pharmacy, or a grocery store, anywhere from 30 to 70% of the merchandise is behind lock and key, and Uber to work can cost anywhere from $40 to $70 one way. The number of people doing DoorDash, Instacart, or Uber Eats has been increasing for years now. Many people in LA are without suitable insurance to pay for the medical issues they have. Full-time employment is something you earn, not something you apply for. Most of us are traveling anywhere between 1 to 4 hours a day for work. The products you rely on are not being restocked, and when they are, the prices are going up. Everyone is sick, and the sickness is taking longer to go away. The demand placed on the average worker exceeds their ability to be productive, and productivity is no longer incentivized. We see our families less and our coworkers more, and our time together is never long enough to deal with matters important to us. The number of homeless people in this city is beyond what can be counted. Only estimates can be used, primarily because many of our homeless refuse to acknowledge they don't have a home. Shopping has become the only third space left, but no one cleans the bathrooms anymore. Should I talk about the racism, the homophobia, the transphobia, the anti-blackness, the ableism, the eugenics, the capitalism, the greed, the dehumanization, the barbarism? I don't think I need to be specific when I say shit is bad outside. The point is LA is a powder keg. Between the eviction crisis, the unemployment rate, and the neo-necrophilic economic policy, things are primed to get really bad here, but only if we fail to use this opportunity to raise our awareness about this epochal moment within each other. We must think beyond the organization as an entity to identify with, to protect, and to do war with each other against one another. We must instead be looking at the infrastructure we're lacking and work earnestly to change the dynamic. Battles can be won or lost in a day or in seconds, but wars are won in waves, not in moments. Wars are won by quartermasters, cooks, medics, engineers, and custodians. By this last part, I mean people who are willing to do the dirty work no one else is willing to do. Wars are won with supply chains, resource allocation, logistics, and principled politics. What's happening in LA is cause and effect. You cannot expect people to write what the city has been doing for years now without expecting violent pushback. What happens next comes down to whether or not we've learned anything from 2020. IDK at this point, but I do know cheap symbolism will no longer lull the people back into complicit docility. Painting Sanctuary City on the streets won't make this go away. If we allow the mayor or the city council to have their way, this will all devolve into another payday for LAPD and other LEO entities. However, if we decide for ourselves right now that the uprisings don't stop until the boot is off our necks, what then? What does that look like? Because we know what the alternative looks like. We're living the consequences of peaceful protest, and none of us in this city can sustain what we're being put through for much longer. Something's got to give, someone's got to blink, and we've already given up so much collectively. I thought that was an interesting patina on top of all of this. This one was also interesting. So today, some self-driving Waymo vehicles were set on fire. You can see them here on fire. The current form of protest is woefully incapable of meeting our moment. Protest is a material threat, like a labor strike, or its optics. If it's optics, the narrative is everything, but leaderless emergent protest leaves room for anyone to create a visceral spectacle that destroys the narrative upper hand. These images will be used to justify, with sufficient public support, further encroachment on civil liberties. I wish I had a solution. I don't know. I just know this isn't working. And we're going to talk about narrative. Hold that thought. We'll come back to that. And this is an excellent place to start it. Right-wing media sets these rat traps, and these idiots bite the cheese every time. Stop accepting their framing and literally amplifying right-wing echo chamber narratives and images. Create a framing to combat it and flood the media with it like they do. Genuinely so stupid. And it had to do with people being like, why are you flying Mexican flags and flags of other countries when protesting against deportation? It looks bad on television. Again, hang on. We're going to get there. We're getting there. One more. The LA riots have already normalized talk of banning all third world immigration, taxing remittances, ending student visas, and accelerating deportations among both the conservative commentariat and U.S. senators. So, with that in mind, what we know now at this hour, which is 7:18 p.m. on June the 9th, is that the Los Angeles Civic Alliance has condemned the deployment of the National Guard in Southern California as unconstitutional, and the president acted illegally. Chief Jim McDonnell of LAPD has not been formally notified that the Marines would arrive in Los Angeles. The possible arrival of federal military forces in Los Angeles, absent clear coordination, presents a significant logistical and operational challenge for those of us charged with safeguarding the city. This map is a location of planned protests today, and this was posted 14 minutes ago. It says the issue here goes beyond Los Angeles or California. If the President of the United States can, without notice to the governor, without the Constitution required request of the governor, send the military into our city, he can do so in any city in America at any time and for any reason he may conjure, the group said in a rare public statement. That's the Los Angeles Civic Alliance. The statement was signed by nearly 24 civic leaders, including former Chamber of Commerce leaders, university officials, a former state treasurer, a former head of the University of California Board of Regents, and head of major Los Angeles nonprofits, law firms, and ethnic media outlets. And this is the map of protests today happening all over the country. And Daniel Huerta, who's the head of, is part of, I think, SEIU. Surface Employees International, yes, SEIU, was arrested and is currently in jail on $50,000 bond. It's gotten quite out of control. There was a arrest and protest in New York City. It's gone, the whole situation has gone entirely out of control. That's what we know right now. Now, I want to talk about narrative. Because as we know, I'm the narrative guy. News is a narrative, that's why they call it a story. There's a lot of talk about the visuals right now, especially when, like this one with the flags and all this type of thing, with the pictures like this where we've got, what do we've got? El Salvador, Mexico, Palestine, somebody else, don't know that flag. And the point that people look at this stuff on television when they're far away from the problem and they see footage like the burning, they see the footage of the burning Waymo vehicles. You're probably even experiencing this right now as I'm showing this and platforming this. You're having thoughts and feelings about what this looks like, what this feels like, if you would agree with it or not. And that all compiles a narrative together of, okay, maybe I agree with them, but I don't like seeing people waving the flag of a foreign nation in the street. That seems un-American. Or why are they attacking self-driving cars? People could have been inside. Someone could have been hurt, and it's not good to, have open fires of, what is private property. They're owned by Waymo, in the streets. This seems disorderly. This seems terrible and corrupt. Why can't they solve it? Even though you might materially maybe not be excited about mass deportations or not a supporter of ICE. Or maybe you look at all of this and say, no, this is what we wanted. Why are these people trying to stop lawful execution of the law happening and trying to stop the government from doing what it needs to do to, restore our country, restore law and order, or any variation of those things in between? The reality is, and we saw this with George Floyd in 2020, narrative is very important. One of the big problems out of the 2020 protests is we ended up with the defund the police slogan becoming a real kind of halcyon moment for police reform in this country. And that came at the end of a decade of talk about reforming the police, different funding, different training, trying to reduce unnecessary violence from peace officers, all this sort of thing. And ultimately, it was kind of a huge shot in the foot, because there are lots of people who say, well, I don't want to I still want to have police. I still want to have safe streets. I still want to have low crime. I still want to, catch criminals sort of thing. But I maybe, understand why people's problem, with the police, but I don't want my police in my town defunded. Like, I don't want to not have police at all, sort of thing. And so you end up with these things, these images, these narratives, these slogans, this stuff coming out of it. And that's people's experience of these things. It creates the narrative, and for better or for worse, how that will shape public perception and public opinion. Perception is reality. I hate that, but it's true, and I say it all the time, even as much as I don't like it, because it 110% is absolutely true. And And especially right now with the big beautiful bill, Trump's new budget, we are talking about taxing remittances at 3.5%. And that was maybe something that wasn't going to pass, that may now very much pass, as, a sort of punishment for everything that's happening, everything that has happened, all, this, violence, and, this, sort of Mexican nationalism. Even some people are calling it paramilitarism, going on in Los Angeles, and with, protests spreading throughout the country, sort of thing. And this is even, I was listening to a segment of Rachel Maddow the other day in the car, because I couldn't find a podcast to listen to. I very rarely consume cable news, but I will occasionally listen to her segments on audio only on Apple Podcasts. And she was already last week talking about the protests against deportations and people getting taken away, and people being like, well, I didn't vote for moms to be deported, just the criminals, it's like, well, not the people I know, somebody else. It's always somebody else. It's never the person near you. It's never you. It's always, well, somebody else, somebody else, sort of thing. The real people causing the problem, not the people I know and trust. Not understanding. No, 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 no. People voted for this. Millions of people pulled the lever for this, and it's quite obvious that Trump is taking advantage of this moment to prove he's the strong law and order guy. I mean, as someone pointed out on Saturday night, he sent the National Guard into Los Angeles and then went to a UFC fight. Very Roman, Trumpus Maximus, sort of thing. And we have this, this narrative forming right now that basically you have out of control Mexican nationalists on the street in Los Angeles burning cars, waving flags of other countries, trying to, stop, lawful things happening, and then people like this saying, please stop flying other countries' flags when protesting against deportation. It's really not helping your cause. You all should be rocking Old Navy US-80s, American flag bikinis, and flying the stars and stripes. Sort of thing. And this is there are people saying, no, this is part of who we are, this is part of who I am, and it doesn't make me any less. And I've said all this to say this person is quite correct. The Democratic Party and liberals in general have a very bad habit of never creating their own framing around this, of always accepting the Republican framing around this, because perception is reality. Now, I happen to think that no amount of reframing is going to solve the visuals of Mexican flags being waved on American streets, of burning Waymo cars, of all the stuff that we've just been seeing and experiencing. However, I do think you could potentially reframe this as these are Americans exercising their First Amendment rights to protest against something that has, quite frankly, dubious legality, and that people are, going to do whatever that they can do and feel comfortable doing to stop, people being taken away from homes and families without any sort of due process, what the Trump administration has done with reckless abandon for 5 months going. You could definitely make the story about Trump, about deportations, about lack of due process, about all of those things. And we've actually seen this before when the Obama administration started the putting people and kids in cages and in detention facilities throughout the country. The narrative was these people are just being kept and warehoused in old Walmarts and old warehouses and things like that. And this is a terrible, terrible sort of thing. I think coming out of 2020, because of the whole defund the police thing, people are sensitive to the visuals and how that creates narrative and therefore perception. But this also needs, I think there does need to be reframing happen. Here's the thing that makes this very hard. This isn't, as we read in another thread, I think it was this thread, there's no one leading this. There's no one in charge of anything. This is, really kind of a spontaneous protest coming out of, people and bouncing off of existing protests that were already happening due to mass deportations. Which means the visuals and the narrative are going to be whatever they're going to be. It's going to be whatever people are feeling in the moment. And if there's, one thing that's true, people may live here and be in this country and love this country, but they also, especially, a lot of people from, California, that part of the country, still have family ties to other countries. They still, feel a kinship with those other countries. And that's not unusual for immigrant populations. And especially now that it's much easier to travel, back and forth and are able to go home and all this type of thing. There's, a lot more maintaining of those connections that was different from another time in which travel was difficult and expensive, and that didn't exist as much. And we can have a whole conversation about assimilation, and I think assimilation is, a really good thing. And I think there should be, more of it, not less. But the reality is this, this is here, this is happening, and when it comes to the narrative, I really would like the narrative to be about we're deporting people to El Salvador prisons with no due process, although that guy Abrego Garcia from Maryland was returned this weekend. I guess they finally found him, and managed to get him back. As kind of that story got lost and everything else going on. And we're deporting people to El Salvador. We're sending people to even South Sudan, which is barely a country. There's warlords in the roads in South Sudan. All this sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's a very, there's definitely a way to frame it around the illegality of the deportations, around the mass deportations, around not letting the government come in and just steal people out of the road. That's where you need to frame as, do we want our government paid for with our tax dollars, who are answerable to us, doing this in our country? And when you frame it that way of, we have laws, we have rules, we're a civilized country, it puts them on the outside of the narrative. Unfortunately, there's no one in charge of this. So there's no really way to change this perception. People are going to do what they feel. And they are going to send whatever message that they feel like, without, any real regard to theory or praxis or a greater, narrative perception or whatever have you. They're going to go to the streets and do what they want to do. And unfortunately, very sadly, this oftentimes means there's going to be a difficult perceptions as video and pictures come out and hit social media. Yes, we know Trump is sparring with Gavin Newsom and threatening to arrest him, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth cited increased threats to federal law enforcement officers in federal buildings for deploying 700 Marines to Los Angeles. Quote, "We have an obligation to defend law enforcement officers even if Gavin Newsom will not." And that's, yes, that's, that's gonna be an interesting, an interesting tweet to hang on to and save. And yeah, there's narrative issues. I kind of look at this in two ways. There's the fact of it. There's the fact that people are mad about it. And there's also the tussle and conversation we are having right now over immigration. And all of these things are just crashing together right now. With immigration and economics, we have a story right here about immigration hurting the economy. We'll talk about it in a moment. And we have the economic, the tariffs, immigration, labor, all of this crashing together. How much, law enforcement do we want in the streets doing this sort of thing? Why are people being sent away without any sort of process? Why are they getting rid of the wrong people? Like even grabbing tourists off the street, making other people feel safe, causing tourism to go down. All of these things are crashing together, and now we have this explosive moment happening. And it galvanizes the focus from everything else onto this kind of singular situation. And it can be very easy for the White House to lose control of this. Very, very easy, in fact. Um, and it's also a tremendous opportunity for Democrats to change how we look about this, how we think about these things, and understand, the implications of everything happening. I know one of the biggest narratives online about immigration is that, we are losing the country to third worlders, and this is, it's all, as that one person wrote in that thread, is everything's become a powder keg. Life is difficult, life is expensive, all this type of thing. But the reality is, immigrants have been a part and parcel fabric of this country since the word go. Um, and and I think one of the struggles that we have um, is that now immigration feels different, the immigrants look different. And the reality is, 100 years ago, in 1925, we banned all immigration for 40 years. After that, because we had had so much immigration from Southern Europe, and it brought in a whole new wave of Catholics, because that was still a thing back then, and all this really, and it is, yeah. So for me, historically, I'm not surprised that we are where we are, all things considered, but it is definitely a difficult moment, and it's a galvanizing moment. What happens in the next week or so is going to be very interesting. So if you don't follow me on social media, you should, because I will be keeping up on the situation. Before we get off immigration, I do want to go through the story from Fortune that talks about immigration and the economy. It says here, vanishing immigration is the real story for the economy and a bigger supply shock than tariffs, the analyst says. President Donald Trump's mobilization of the California National Guard troops to protect immigration officers from protesters highlights his crackdown on undocumented workers and the economic impact of the sudden drop in labor supply. Protests in Los Angeles began on Friday when armed federal agents clad in camouflage uniforms, tactical vests, and helmets arrived in armored vehicles to carry out a raid on a clothing wholesaler. It was the latest in a series of similar high-profile operations at businesses around the country. Also on Friday, the Labor Department issued its monthly jobs report, which showed the U.S. workforce shrank in May as the number of foreign-born workers saw the biggest back-to-back decline since 2020. It dropped about 1 million people. That comes after a surge in immigration during the Biden administration helped boost economic activity. According to a Deutsche Bank analysis of data from the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, the number of encounters at the southwest border had plunged to 12,000 people per month since Trump's inauguration, from an average of 200,000 during the more than 2-year period between January 2022 and June of 2024. Quote, while everyone is focused on the impact of tariffs, the real story for the U.S. economy is the collapse in immigration, down more than 90% compared to the run rate of previous years, equivalent to a slowing in labor force growth of more than 2 million people, George Saravelos, head of FX research at Deutsche Bank, wrote in a note on Friday. This represents a far more sustained negative supply shock for the economy than tariffs. While Trump has pointed to weaker payroll growth as reasons for the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates, his immigration crackdown gives the central bank, which is already wary of the inflationary effect of his tariffs, another reason to wait and see. That's because a workforce that is growing more slowly doesn't need as much hiring to absorb the additional labor supply. In fact, even as average payroll gains have cooled to 124,000 a month this year from 250,000 in 2024, the jobless rate has hovered around 4.2% since last summer. Wall Street sees a lower break-even rate for job growth, or the amount of hiring needed to keep the unemployment rate steady. By the end of this year, that pace should fall to 90,000 per month from 170,000 now and 210,000 last year, according to Morgan Stanley, which cited deportations and slower immigration. Deutsche Bank warned the collapse of immigration will have the broader implications in financial markets, including for the dollar, which has already been battered by Trump's aggressive tariff campaign. Last year, we were writing that the U.S. was benefiting from a Goldilocks mix of high employment growth and low wages precisely because of high immigration numbers, Saravello said. If recent immigration trends continue, it must follow that over the course of the year, the reverse will happen. As the 2022 energy shock slowed, a negative supply shock is not good news for a currency. And so, I think this is a very interesting cherry on top of this whole situation, that this is all expensive in more ways than one. There's the money to actually do it. There's the money they're spending to ship people places. And then there's also the real economic reality of what happens when you want to expand the economy and you want to have tremendous, growth and everything, but then you're also, really getting rid of the people who are going to build the houses, build the factories, all this sort of thing. It's a very difficult, minus the fact the political capital being spent on this is, it all adds up to a very devastating, situation. So, that's the immigration situation. We're gonna kind of put a needle in that and move on to some other stories before we wrap things up. So, this is some economic news that I thought was interesting. Second quarter GDP was up slightly. So on June 2nd, the GDP Now model estimate for real GDP growth in the second quarter of 2025 is 4.6%, up from 3.8% on May 30th. And I don't think we need to go read the whole thing. Yes, there was a slight uptick. So it looks like in spite of all this, we might get some growth out of all this, and which is interesting given all the layoffs, AI, all the other stuff happening. We're still growing forward slightly, which is good. But GDP Now is an interesting model, and they have the estimates kind of going forward. There are still other people who think we're going to start shrinking towards the end of the year. There's people that are convinced we're going to have a recession later this year. Right now, it appears no recession coming, which is good. But don't worry, because Trump's new tariff situation, supposed to cause manufacturing boom, is strangling manufacturing. Funny how that works. This story is from Politico from last week. Trump wants a manufacturing boom. The industry is buckling. If the tariffs fail to bring a manufacturing revival, it would weaken the prospects of a GOP coalition that increasingly relies on working-class voters. President Donald Trump is vowing to spark a manufacturing boom with tariffs to protect American workers and industry. So far, it's manufacturers that have borne the brunt of the pain. The president's surprise decision to raise tariffs on imported steel and aluminum to 50% will hit domestic manufacturing just as a new report shows the industry is already contracting. Uncertainty about where tariff rates will ultimately land or where they'll be applied has forced businesses to make hard decisions that could cut into both profits and hiring, and a leading trade group on Thursday called on Trump to give the companies a break on the tariffs. For a president who's intent on building U.S. manufacturing, the tariff strategy he's laid out is remarkably short-sighted, said Gordon Hanson, a Harvard Kennedy School professor, whose groundbreaking 2016 research work, quote, The China Shock, unquote, was among the first to sound the alarm about the threat to American industry. Quote, it fails to recognize what modern supply chains look like, unquote. Quote, even if you're intent on reshoring parts of manufacturing, you can't do it all, unquote, he said. Steel and aluminum are part of that. If Trump's tariffs fail to result in a manufacturing renaissance, a central focus of his presidential campaign, it could weaken the prospects of a GOP coalition that's increasingly reliant on working-class voters who supported his protectionist trade policies. But as unanticipated tariffs continue to drive up input costs for companies that need steel and aluminum for production, the warning signs emanating from manufacturers are getting louder. An index published this week by the Institute for Supply Management, which tracks manufacturing, slipped for the third straight month in May as companies made plans to scale back production. A quarterly survey conducted by the National Association of Manufacturers reported the steepest drop in optimism since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, with trade uncertainty and raw material costs cited as top concerns. Federal Reserve data this month reported weaker manufacturing output. The Manufacturers Association on Thursday urged Trump to develop a, quote, speed pass, unquote, that would allow companies to avoid costly new duties on imported raw materials and components that are essential to U.S. producers. Quote, the steel and aluminum tariffs are almost custom-made to hurt American manufacturing, unquote, said Ernie Tedeschi, a former top Biden administration economist who's not at the Yale Budget Lab. Trump and top administration officials argue that tariffs will encourage investment in domestic manufacturers, which should lead to better-paying jobs, a more resilient economy, and more secure supply chains. Exports climbed in April as the president's tariffs took hold, which contributed to an eye-popping decline in the U.S. trade deficit, which we talked about last week. Indeed, the overall economy remains solid, and businesses are continuing to hire, according to Friday's jobs report for May. Despite the trade headwinds, employment in the manufacturing sector has remained steady since Trump took office. As the president says, if you don't make steel, you can't fight a war. He's protecting that industry and bringing it back, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told Senate lawmakers this week. You're going to see more steel and aluminum furnaces and mills in the history of this country get built over the next 3 years. The White House did not respond to a request for comment. Trump welcomed the monthly jobs report, posting on Truth Social, quote, "America is hot. 6 months ago it was cold as ice. Border is closed, prices are down, wages are up. Still, domestic manufacturers who rely on international supply chains for critical steel and aluminum inputs will face tough choices if they want to maintain their profits while keeping output steady. Quote, higher costs are expected, higher input prices. The question is, what do you do with those costs? How much can you pass along to the consumer? How much can you negotiate with your suppliers?" Unquote. And Andrew Siliciano, a partner at KPMG, who heads the consulting firm's trade and customs practice. But the challenges posed by the increase in steel and aluminum tariffs are particularly acute because it's far from clear whether domestic suppliers will be able to meet the demands of domestic manufacturers. Almost half the aluminum used in the U.S. last year came from foreign sources, according to federal data, and roughly a quarter of all steel is imported. Either way, quote, input costs are going to be higher, unquote, as Ciliano said. If they pass it on, it could affect demand. If they don't pass it on, it could affect profitability. That isn't to say manufacturers won't benefit from tariffs in the long term. To the extent that Trump's overall tariff regime hits imports, U.S.-based industrial production could expand to address unmet demand. The Budget Lab's analysis of Trump's tariffs regime, which includes 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, projects that manufacturing output could grow by 1.3% over the next 5 years if existing import duties are left in place. But Tedeschi cautioned that growth may exclude segments like electronic and semiconductor production, which tend to generate higher incomes for workers. Meanwhile, other sectors like construction or agriculture would likely contract. And it goes on to talk about a bunch of numbers we're not going to concern ourselves with. Either way, the economy is being absolutely battered right now. I need to save this tab for another story. Absolutely battered by now by immigration and the tariff trade war regime and all this. It is it's a mess out there. If you're really concerned about an economic deep dive, make sure to subscribe to my newsletter on LinkedIn. It's exclusive for business, and I dive into some of these topics more deeply, specifically for business. So linkedin.com/in/Cameron Cowan. You can connect with me or just follow me, and it'll invite you to the newsletter, and we can really kind of dig into that. And I'm actually going to save this tab because I need it for that. So moving right along, we're going to get into the New Yorker profile of Curtis Yarvin. So if you don't know who Curtis Yarvin is, he has become a doyen of the right, and he, weirdly enough, advocates for a return to monarchy. He started his life as Mencius Moldbug, and he made himself incredibly well known online, kind of, going against the modern mass democracy, egalitarian approach, and going for something a little bit more, historic. It says, written with the sneering disaffection of an ex-believer, the 120,000-word letter argued that egalitarianism, far from improving the world, was actually responsible for most of its ills. That his bien peasant readers thought otherwise, Moldbug contended, was due to the influence of the media and the academy, which worked together, however unwittingly, to perpetuate a left-liberal consensus. To this nefarious alliance it gave the name the Cathedral. Moldbug called for nothing less than its destruction and a total reboot of the social order. He proposed a liquidation of democracy, the Constitution, and the rule of law, and the eventual transfer of power to a CEO-in-chief, someone like Steve Jobs or Mark Andreessen, who would transform the government into a heavily armed, ultra-profitable corporation. This new regime would sell off public schools, destroy universities, abolish the press, and imprison decivilized populations. It would also fire civil servants en masse. A policy Moldbug leader called Rage, retire all government employees. Oh, this is paywalled, but it's not going to be for very long because I have the New Yorker on Apple News. Hang on. There it is. Talk about the sausage being made. And discontinue international relations, including security guarantees, foreign aid, and mass immigration. Moldbug acknowledged that his vision depended on the sanity of his chief executive. Clearly, if he or she turns out to be Hitler or Stalin, we've just recreated Nazism or Stalinism. Yet he dismissed the failures of 20th century dictators, whom he saw as too reliant on popular support. For Moldbug, any system that sought legitimacy in the passions of the mob was doomed to instability. Though critics labeled him a techno-fascist, he preferred to call himself a royalist or a Jacobite, a nod to the partisans of James II and his descendants who, in the 17th and 18th centuries, opposed Britain's parliamentary system and upheld the divine right of kings. Never mind the French Revolution, the bête noire of reactionary thinkers, Moldbug believed that the English and American revolutions had gone too far. If Moldbug's open letters showed little affection for the masses, it intimated they might still have a use. Communism was not overthrown by Andrei Sakharov, Joseph Brodsky, and Václav Havel, he wrote. What was needed was the combination of philosopher and crowd. The best place to recruit this crowd, he said, was on the internet, a shrewd intuition. Before long, links to Moldbug's blog, Unqualified Reservations, were being passed around by libertarian techies, disgruntled bureaucrats, and self-styled rationalists, many of whom formed the shock troops of an online intellectual movement that came to be known as Neo-Reaction or the Dark Enlightenment. While few turned into outright monarchists, their contempt for Obama-era uplift seemed to find voice in Moldbug's heresies. In his most influential coinage, which quickly gained currency among the nascent alt-right, Moldbug urged his readers to rouse themselves from their ideological slumber by taking, quote, the red pill, like Keanu Reeves' character in The Matrix, who chooses daunting truth over contented ignorance. And here we begin to see where our modern politic is created. And then this person goes on to interview Yarvin. And it starts to get into that is an excellent summary of his kind of thought and all this sort of thing. And he gets into his personal life and background and all this type of thing. And it gets into kind of the far right, how the far right galvanized online and got so popular so quickly. And remember over this time, and it's kind of funny because I knew Mencius Moldbug. I didn't know about Yarvin until recently. I think a lot of people, that was true for a lot of people. And he, there's in the Obama years, there was this sort of galvanization of what became the alt-right, which was, the intellectual dark web came out of that time as, social justice and DEI expanded, and that gave us the Weinstein brothers and Heather Heying, and that gave us Sam, what's his name? Not Sam Altman, that's ChatGPT, or OpenAI rather. Sam Harris, all these different thinkers, and Yarvin kind of flew below the radar till very recently, but if you look at, he really is the progenitor of so much of the conversation that's happened on the online right, and when you think about it, it's kind of like, honestly, a lot of what has happened since 2016 makes a lot of sense. Oh crap, that's not what I wanted to do. Sense what's happened when you understand this had already been in progress and in flight. This part is kind of very interesting. To that point, Yarvin advises his followers to avoid culture war battles over issues like DEI and abortion. It is wiser, he argues, to let the democratic system collapse on its own. In the meantime, dissidents should focus on becoming fashionable by building a reactionary subculture, a counter-cathedral. Sam Criss, a left-wing writer who has debated Yarvin, said of his work, quote, it flatters people who believe they can change the world simply by having weird ideas on the internet and decadent parties in Manhattan, unquote. Such people have come to be known as the dissident right, a loose constellation of artists and strivers clustered around the Bay Area, Miami, and the Lower East Side micro-neighborhood of Dime Square. The milieu was drawn together by a frustration with electoral politics, COVID lockdowns, and the strictures of wokeness. Vice signaling has been central to the scene's countercultural allure. Instead of sharing pronouns and employing the approved nomenclature, unhoused, Latinx, justice-involved person, its members have revived insults like gay and retarded. Dasha Nekrasova and Anna Kachian, the hosts of the Red Scare podcast, are among the most prominent avatars of the scene. In 2021, Thiel helped to fund an anti-woke film festival in New York, and Yarvin read his poetry at one of its packed events. Urbit now hosts a literary magazine designed to look like the New York Review of Books. Quote, if you're an intelligent Jewish-American urbanite who wants to play around with certain Nietzschean and eugenic themes, you aren't going to join tiki torch-bearing marchers chanting the Jews will not replace us, the conservative commentator Sohrab Amari observed in an essay last year. No, you turn to the dissident right. I would encourage, I'm not going to, as it goes on and on and on, I'm not going to go through all of this. Please go read on your own. It's in the New Yorker, the current issue. Great cover. It's out today. I would encourage you to go through all of that on your own. But it's a very, if you don't know who he is, you should learn who he is, because he's had an outsized influence on society, and we're going to be hearing more about him moving forward. Um, and to the whole point of libertarianism, um, and we're gonna do this for a moment on the Elon end of things. What's this one? Oh yeah, we'll get to BBB here in a second. Um, so the Elon Trump breakup. Speaking of libertarianism and libertarians in the Bay Area trying to fix government, this all holds together somehow. It all kind of adds up. Elon likes to ask his engineers, is it against the laws of physics? Well, demanding libertarianism from an elected legislature is literally against the laws of physics. And the median voter doesn't work or pay taxes. They're always playing with the House's money. Parties that consume the commons will always be more powerful than those who abstain. You can't fix this by making kids watch John Stossel in high school. And I saw this and I'm kind of like, Elon isn't mad at Trump. He's mad at the laws of thermodynamics. And I was kind of like, okay, sure. And so I actually went to read the Substack. And I, was, kind of reading through, okay, and it gets into, spending cuts and all this sort of thing. And, Elon is now pitching a socially liberal, fiscally conservative centrist party. But just as there are no low-energy rich countries, there are no libertarian voters. To be clear, I'm not saying libertarianism is currently unpopular. This is not a contingent problem of education that we could solve by making high school kids watch John Stossel. There are no libertarian voters. Most voters don't work. They aren't net taxpayers. As long as it's possible to increase spending and cut taxes, parties that propose to do so will defeat parties that propose the reverse, because the median voter is always playing with the House's money. Like the relationship between wealth and energy use, the unpopularity of libertarian politics is rooted in a thermodynamic reality. There's always more energy in political movements that eat the commons than in movements that abstain. Campaigns like Javier Milei's in Argentina only work after the commons is utterly spent and the socialists have no more gibs to distribute. The government is spending $10 billion a day, or was a year ago. The debt cannot be repaid under our present economic and political paradigm. That's not true. Our options are A, explicit default, B, implicit default through hyperinflation, or C, a decade of austerity and managed inflation. The first two would be a global national security and humanitarian catastrophe. The third is by far the best option for everyone, but no democratically elected government could survive it. A government that derived its authority from other principles might, but Trump is the only remotely credible candidate for something like that, and there's nothing to be gained from undermining him. Besides which, the BBB, Big Beautiful Bill, directly funds law enforcement resources that are currently testing the waters and building capacity for that kind of political transition. In any case, if there's not an orderly reform of the American political system, there will be a chaotic and violent one in the aftermath of default. Bottom line, I know a handful of you have Elon's number. America needs you to gift him some hop on Audible immediately. What does this mean for us? Maybe nothing. Maybe Elon and Trump are playing 4D chess. Maybe they'll kiss and make up tomorrow. Trump has brought people back into the fold after more acrimonious arguments than this. But at face value, this instance suggests that Elon is still basically a 90s tech libertarian, eternally at war with human nature, eternally commanding the tide. We may not need Elon to get it, but it'd be a lot cooler if he did. Fortunately, there are 0 cases of a democracy waking up en masse and becoming libertarian. There are many, many cases of smart libertarians waking up and rejecting democracy. It can still happen. In the meantime, we need to prepare for our leaders to remain unimaginative and for the ship of state to continue lurching towards the cliff. We have to build systems that get our families what they need, including basics like financial and physical security. We need redundancies for anything whose providence depends on the U.S. government having its act together for the next decade. He's crazy. We're not going to go down all of that sort of thing. But we are going to... he's fun. I've see some interesting things for it, but I thought that was an interesting idea that Elon's whole program was to radically cut government spending, and he didn't get it out of the BBB. We'll finish on this. Well, actually, we'll do Project 2025 as well. But on this topic, Tucked in Donald Trump's sprawling One Big Beautiful Bill Act is a clause that could quietly take billions from money sent abroad. It proposes a 3.5% tax on remittances sent abroad by foreign workers, including green card holders and temporary visa workers, such as those on H-1B visas. The reality, and I wish had found the map, there's a great map of how much money goes overseas. Indians in 2023, Indians abroad sent home $119 billion, enough to finance half of India's goods trade deficit and outpace foreign direct investment. And I mean, not anymore because they've developed, but in the 90s, half of Mexico's economy was remittances. Literally, if we cut off the spigot, the economy would have collapsed. It's one of the reasons Clinton had to rescue their banks. And this also, other major recipients include Mexico, China, the Philippines, France, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. This actually raises a lot of revenue. I'm actually in favor of a remittances tax. Should have been taxed a long time ago. Very in favor of it. Love it. Let's do it. But the reality is they're still increasing the deficit. The debt will still increase, $3.3 trillion over the next decade. The hope, of course, is that economic growth will close the gap. It never does. They always say it will, and it never does. But this is definitely an interesting way to actually raise some revenue and reclaim some of the money that's not going into the economy. And the reality is remittances, that's money, I think the total of it's about $1.1 trillion, leaves the economy every year and goes around the rest of the world. Trump's trying to get a hold of some of that money. And I don't blame him. But that's just one thing in how the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is going to radically change your job, your economy, this country. And we are... this is a good thing, but we're also lurching towards a certain amount of authoritarianism, for sure. And we have people like, Bennett here, really advocating for it, and saying that, we need, that we're going, this is, that we, need to have, that we need to, have a government that can just, do things that are necessary and, gut anybody's gourd who needs to be gutted in order to achieve that goal. That's going to leave a lot of people behind. A lot of people are going to die. Just putting that out there. Finally, because my voice is tired, I had an appearance today and a recording. Finally, I found the Project 2025 tracker. I'm actually bookmarking this right now. Because I was shocked at how much of the Project 2025 has already gotten done. There are 313 line items. 99 have been done. 63 are in progress, leaving them at 42%. With 1,320 days left until the end of Trump's term. It's quite impressive how much has been done and accomplished in 5 months. This is stark. This is a lot. They wanted to make a whole new country, and Lord knows they are well on their way to doing just that. I think we have another mosquito in here. I killed one earlier. I have the air conditioner in the window, so I probably need to tape that up. Anyway, I was amazed at how much a Project 2025 has already gotten done. Genuinely amazed. It's quite impressive. So we'll keep a monitor on that. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. I hope you have a great week. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter. I'll have some great content out for you. Please share this around. Clips will be coming out here shortly. The interview this week is from a very nice gentleman who talks about why you need soft skills in your technical roles with Evgeny Karam, which is really, really great. And that's out today on YouTube and other channels and all this sort of thing. So make sure to give that a listen. And I will see you all next Monday night on the Cameron Journal News Hour. Follow me on my socials, CameronJournal.com. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.